For your awards consideration, Hacks. The Emmy Award-winning Max original series starring Jean Smart explores a dark mentorship that forms between a legendary Las Vegas comedian and an entitled, outcast 25-year-old writer played by Hannah Einbinder. Praised by Decider as a masterful, genius, and spectacular approach to comedy, the series dazzles as a display of beguiling chemistry between Smart and Einbinder, who the Chicago Sun-Times lauds as stunningly good together. Hacks is now streaming on HBO Max. Welcome to In the Envelope, a podcast from Backstage, the one-stop shop for actors and creators both above and below the line. I am your host, Vinny Mancuso, Backstage senior editor and professional entertainment obsessive. I'll be your guide through every corner of the creative industry with the help of some of your favorite stars. Here you'll find intimate, in-depth talks with today's most award-worthy names in film, television, and theater. Along the way, we'll get advice on living your best creative life, relatable stories of the highest highs and lowest lows, and maybe, just maybe, a rare peek in the envelope.
I find it so liberating. I found it was the closest thing, and often again on long lenses. Like my dream as an actor is being shot on long lenses when you have no idea what they're catching, whether they're on you, whether they're on someone else, and it's the closest to playing a complete truth that you can have.
Welcome to In the Envelope, the Actors Podcast. I am your host, Backstage senior editor Vinny Mancuso. If you're listening to this episode live, you know we have somehow, again, against all odds, made it to December 2022. We are looking forward to not only a new year, but just over the horizon, God help us all, a brand new awards season. The SAG Awards, the Indie Spirit Awards, and of course, the Oscars. So, of course, In the Envelope is going to be sitting down with some of the biggest names in the hunt this year for those wins, and that includes today's guest, of course, Eddie Redmayne, who is gaining Oscar buzz for his performance across from former guest Jessica Chastain in The Good Nurse. His very, very scary performance in The Good Nurse. If you still haven't checked it out, it is the chilling true story of Charlie Cullen, a nurse responsible for an untold amount of deaths over 16 years. It's horrifying. And Redmayne takes on the role and is just remarkably unnerving, but impressively so. It's an incredibly subtle, incredibly scared performance. Check it out. We dug into the performance, of course, and everything that came with it, but we also somehow talked about a lot more than that, from Jupiter Ascending to Cabaret Live, to the theory of everything, the currently in limbo Fantastic Beasts franchise. We just covered a lot of ground. It is a wonderful chat with a wonderful actor. Let's get into it. Here is Eddie Redmayne. Eddie, how are you doing? Thank you so much for being here.
Mate, thank you for having me. I'm really well. I'm thrilled to be in New York. It's festive and chilly, and it's one of my favorite places at one of my favorite times of year. So.
Are you here for professional reasons, personal reasons? I mean, pleasure? Or...
I'm a mixture of the two, actually. So yeah, a bit of work and a bit of pleasure, but it's I don't know what it is. There's something sort of, I think it's, having watched all those movies as a kid, being in New York at Christmas time or the lead up to the holidays is so special.
Yeah. I mean, I've lived in California and New York, and I don't think anything beats New York, from like Thanksgiving to Christmas.
I completely agree. And I'm still one of those people that's never, I once had a hot Christmas when I was making a film in Australia.
Yeah.
And I found it very odd, and I'm yet to reconcile barbecues with Christmas.
I can't stand a hot Christmas. I really can't. So yeah, I mean, I'm so excited to talk about so much, but top of the list is The Good Nurse. Congratulations on a truly chilling performance. Just really incredible stuff. I'm really excited to get into it, but I also do want to back up a bit to get a sort of look at your entire career and all that. And I was looking, doing research for the interview, looking up things from the past, and I did find an an IMDb list of your favorite films from 2014.
Wow.
And your number one choice was Disney's Robin Hood. I'm curious if does that opinion still hold? Is that something that's changed over the years?
I mean, I don't know whether it would be. I always find the rating of films such an odd thing anyway, and it's something that I'm quite often asked to do. But as far as like having an effect, as far as the sort of Robin Hood is a film that I just adored, and I think like it was a complete escapism as a child. I found all the characters so kind of colourful and filled, and now, like years and years later, I've shown it to my kids, and you now kind of respect the voice performances in it. It's just extraordinary. They're through the roof, and and so there's something sort of so tangible about each of those characters, and I've attempted doing voice work for cartoons and stop motion stuff, and it's so much easier said than done. So it does remain like. Yeah, that character Hiss, the snake in it, is one of the great characters. And the music.
I think this list from 2014, there was like a sentence for each movie, and I'm pretty sure you wrote how much. What you chose to write is how much you love Hiss the snake. There you go.
So basically nothing's changed.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, Disney's doing these live action remakes. You never know. We could get your name out there.
I know, but you also want to be careful because you never want to sort of. I think you have to be wary of being in something that you're like a massive fan of.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean? You don't want to go and butcher that memory.
Then it's kind of hanging over your head.
Exactly. It's untouchable, that movie. But I did hear that they were doing it and was trying to picture what that would be like in live action. You know,
it would just be a Robin Hood movie.
Hot foxes.
Exactly. Are you someone? You know, I ask this a lot of our guests because you know it is what we ask our guests to do. Are you someone who reflects a lot? Someone who looks back on accomplishments on your career, or is that something you don't tend to do?
No, I definitely throughout since I started, I've always had this thing of. I don't know whether it's a sort of neurosis from having not gone to drama school or trained and ending up doing a job that you didn't feel like you were given a certificate to do. I know that sounds absurd, but I've always had this paranoia about learning from what you do, learning from the people around you. The early days, that was the actors, and now more and more it's the crew. But I've always watched the stuff I'm doing. I've always quite enjoyed watching rushes. And in the early days, it was essential because I had no idea what I was doing. And the purely, some of the sort of more technical elements, just no one on a film set, no one wants to be rude and tell you those things. But certainly on my first film, I was sort of, projecting to the back of the stalls, having only done theatre but I then don't. So I will watch films, and as much as a director wants me to be, I will be part of the process in the edit and watching, assemblies and giving feedback if they want it. I always want to give as much as I can to the point that I can't until the film is locked, because there is doing acting in film or television is fundamentally. Well, there's an element of dissatisfaction because it never fulfills quite how you pictured it in your head, and so what you always want to do is I find is do as much as I can to really make it clear, well, basically so that you don't beat yourself up too much when you see the final thing. And then, but for years I haven't really watched it back. But this year, whilst promoting The Good Nurse, there've been a couple of events that I've gone to where they've done reels of moments of different things, and it's so interesting to watch that stuff back because for me, it's about where you are in your life. It's the memories of the film, of the set, and all of that stuff come flooding back rather than the work itself, I suppose.
That's interesting because I get the answer to the question, do you watch your own performances? I get we get the wide range of answers from people who absolutely will not. So I'm curious, when you're either watching even dailies or the finished performance, what are you looking for? What is something that you're specifically trying to see in your own performance that either helps or hurts or anything like that?
It depends, honestly. There have been some films I've done that there were really intricate technicalities. So, for example, playing Stephen Hawking in Theory of Everything, so much of, I suppose, the technical rather than the emotional side of that performance was about things like movement, the specificity of the disease, checking that I was getting that right, because I'd spent a lot of time with families and family members of people living with that disease, and that felt important. But also it was to do with proportion. For example, as Stephen got older, he almost sort of shrunk, and we were using things like oversized clothing or sort of prosthetic knee pieces that went underneath the clothes to make him look more bony, because we weren't shooting it chronologically, so I couldn't really oscillate in weight and those things. So and it was often about camera angles, whether that likeness was caught or not. And so on that film, it was very particular to that. Similarly in the Danish Girl. And then, and sometimes I find it, watching things back, is you can tell what film you're in. Mm-hmm. And I'm not saying that it's not something I'll do after every take necessarily, but certainly on The Good Nurse, for example, Tobias Lindholm, our brilliant director, and Jessica Chastain and I had spent a month sort of rehearsing and prepping, and we talked it through with quite a lot of intricacy. And then I remember doing the first scene of the film, and it was this scene of me, that there was a code and I had to sort of deal with it. And Tobias shot it on this very long lens from back in the corridor, and Jodie Lee Leipz, the cinematographer, had lit it very, very dark, and it was just this gentle zoom that went on for about sort of 5 minutes while I watched what was going on, and it was so interesting, because after having watched that take, after we had done a run of those, Tobias said, "Do you want to have a look back?" And it gave me a sense of the movie I was in. When I saw that, I saw what Tobias and Jodie's vision for the piece was. And then I don't think I didn't watch a huge amount from then on in the film, because I sort of trusted them, and I needed it was less of a technical performance. But so it does shift depending on the piece.
What's been the sort of the projects you've done, the widest gulf between what you thought was what film you thought it was in the preparation process versus what it was when you got to see what the entire vision was for the piece?
What a great question. Truth is, it was Jupiter Ascending, which was a film that I did with the Wachowski siblings, and the reason is because when I read the script, I had. It was so insane and brilliantly drawn and so in their imaginations that I could basically never imagine what it was going to be. So it's not that it was different to how I imagined it. It was just.
It's that nobody can imagine what the Wachowskis are thinking.
Exactly. Yeah. It was and I love that, and I find it so extraordinary when you go to the cinema and your jaw drops with people's vision. Whether it works or not, when someone takes like a sort of massive punt and it doesn't seem sort of derivative and it comes from something completely new. But I did learn from that, because particularly going into the Fantastic Beasts movies, that when you're working in a world of green screen, you do actually need quite specific knowledge of what's surrounding you. And that was a good learning lesson for heading off into the world of CGI.
I love that. I've always said that if I got to interview, I would tell you this. I genuinely really love your Jupiter Ascending performance.
That is very kind.
When I'm in this, in this job, we watch so many movies that any performance that feels like something you haven't seen before, you learn to appreciate it. It's almost like you watch so many performances that are good in the way that you've seen that anything that stands out. Yeah. I will always respect. So I'm very happy.
I had an amazing time doing it as well. I was just it was a real dive into the imagination, and I know it was quite intense for Mila and for Channing. They were in every day, but the thing that I'll never forget about that film is I was basically on paternity leave cover. So I was playing the baddie, and I wasn't really in many scenes with Channing. So and he was his then wife was about to have a baby, and I was basically there doing sit-ups for months, because my character was meant to be incredibly vain and was topless most of the things. So I was and I'd be there, and I was waiting for the day that Channing got the call from the hospital saying that his wife's having a baby, and then I went in to do my work, and it was But it was, and we did all the scenes back to back on these like cavernous stages of greenery, and with like an amazing, one of the actors was on sort of stilts with dots all over his head. I just had never experienced anything like that. I had come from sort of, the odd English period drama, and when I saw it, it was definitely it was a sort of like a sort of disco on steroids.
I love that, and that kind of reminds me of what you said about The Good Nurse, how that everything that was affecting you in terms of the lighting, the cinematography, the slow zoom. I am curious, it's something that a lot of people don't think about in terms of specifically screen acting. In all of your preparation and all the rehearsal for the scene, how do you factor in the cinematography itself? Because, I think about The Good Nurse, it's a lot of shadows, a lot of, a lot of sort of those slow zooms. At what point in your performance process do you factor in, like literally that's where the camera is going to be, that's where the camera's going to end up?
Do you know what? It's not something that you can ever tell really until those first camera tests. And more I find as I work those moments of camera tests in which everyone's trying everything, whether it's the makeup department, the lighting department, all of the intricacies. There used to be things where as an actor you would stand there and sort of, it's an odd thing. You kind of stand there and you try and do a little bit of something so that they don't fire you. Everyone's looking because everyone's flipping nervous and they've put all this investment in it. But I've now tried to make camera tests be something in which I can play and see what world the film is in. I like to see those rushes and kind of work from them. So Jodie in The Good Nurse, it was extraordinary. He shot in virtual pitch black darkness. I mean, that's slightly extreme, but it really was substantially darker than it appears in the film. And he would then open these apertures, I think, and it would look much lighter on screen than it was. But it did give this thing, which I've never had before, which is almost the entire crew were in darkness. So when I was playing opposite Jess, it really was only her that I could see. And I found it so liberating. I found it was the closest thing, and often again on long lenses. Like my dream as an actor is being shot on long lenses when you have no idea what they're catching, whether they're on you, whether they're on someone else, and it's the closest to playing a complete truth that you can have. And I Tobias was an extraordinary director, but something also about the kind of crepuscular quality of the filming. It made everyone very quiet. On the wards, everyone's attention was really focused, and it gave you the capacity to play without feeling too judged.
Is there almost a theater-ish quality to something like that, or is it a completely different experience?
I would say it's even better than theater because nothing's being projected. Nothing's being, it's actually the closest to a reality I've ever had.
So it's like the opposite of theater.
Yeah, in some ways. But no, I found it so special.
That's very interesting.
But as far as cinematography and the other technical elements, again, it was Theory of Everything that changed that for me, because there was a moment in Theory of Everything when Stephen can't climb up the stairs anymore. And the thing with ALS is that you have to stay ahead of the disease. So the architecture of the house you're living in, once you can't go up the stairs, you need to move your bed downstairs. And staying ahead of the disease is always something. And it was one day while we were prepping Theory that I went and looked around the production office and saw lots of the designs for the sets. And suddenly I sort of saw this upstairs set that they would, and I was like, wait, no, but he can't actually climb those stairs, or there was a bunk bed and he can't climb that anymore. So I realized that if I turned up on the day, it would have caused a total fuss to go, oh no, we can't actually shoot this because it doesn't marry with what the disease is. And what that did was it made me realize that those rehearsal periods, or those periods before shooting, quite often on film sets, just because of the amount of work, departments are kept separate. But the more that you can go and just gain insight into what it is, the more ideas you can come with on the day, ultimately, whether it's, props or costume. I try and get ahead of all that so that there's always something surprising on the day. But if you can, because you only have such a limited period on camera to find ideas, it's for me good to have some sort of a bit of a runway.
Well, it's funny. I've seen you mention before that if you had to describe your, quote unquote process, it would be, the research, a lot of prep, like you said, a long runway. I'm curious, when it crystallized for you that was what works for you. Did you try other things throughout, the earlier period? Did you try other methods, or was it more of like a, gathering things as it went along?
Accumulating. There was one moment when I was doing a play by the brilliant Christopher Shin called Now or Later, which I did at the Royal Court many years ago, and Dominic Cook directed it. And Dominic then, I don't know if he still does, but worked with intentions. So we would sit down as a cast and we would, provide intentions for every single sentence. And I found it rigorous, and I found it thrilling, and I found it frustrating, and I found it, but it was brilliant in the sense that by the time you were playing the piece, you'd forgotten what those intentions were, but they were embedded somewhere, and it meant that there was no fat. The whole thing was just like lean, and there was no sort of waste. And I found that was a very important moment for me, because I don't intention everything I do now, but if I'm struggling, that's what I'll always look to. But the thing about the long runway or having prep time, let me just be absolutely clear, that is total privilege. And it came from the theory of everything when I was cast in that. And our wonderful director, James Marsh, said, Eddie, by the way, this does kind of live or die in your performance, so what do you need? And I went, sort of almost dry
I really need everything.
Exactly. But then I did kind of go what, for once, rather than as actors, we're so used to just oh, it's fine, I'll don't worry, I don't, you don't want to be difficult. Going, okay, well, I think this is what I need. I need prep time. I need someone specific to work on the movement aspect with me, someone specific to work on the vocal aspect, and I need time to go and research, and he gave me that, and because the process was so rewarding, and because the film went well, ultimately, it allowed me to be able to a certain extent, when I can, and this isn't to a production, this is to me, go I'm not an actor that can go from one job into the other. Things like accent, I'm not one of those actors that can just sort of drop into an accent. I have to start very musically, and then and months before, so that by the time I'm working, it is effortless, and you can improvise.
For your awards consideration, House of the Dragon. The reign of House Targaryen begins in this HBO original series, starring Paddy Considine, Matt Smith, Olivia Cook, Rhys Ifans, and Emma Darcy. IndieWire calls the performances superb acting. Don't miss the series Entertainment Weekly calls gorgeous and flat out stunning. House of the Dragon is now streaming on HBO Max. Your last theater role was the Olivier Award winning MC in Cabaret, which is also a role that you played at 17, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
I'm curious about, what returning to the same role that with so much time in between, what did that teach you about, those years in between and, where you've come from? Just sort of slipping back into that thing with that much time in between.
God, that is such a good question. And it's quite, I suppose this year has been a bit emotional in that sense, in that it was the thing. I listened to Kander and Neb's Cabaret when I was 15, I think it was, and they were doing it at the school, and I was cast as the MC, and I knew nothing I had no idea what I was doing. It was pure instinct, and I just loved it. And it was the thing that my parents saw and went, and they don't come from this industry at all. And it was then that they sort of began to take seriously that might be. So it was pure instinct then. It was, and my mum found a video of it somewhere the other day and it was so interesting this was when I was halfway through the run, and to see back what those instincts were versus where it was now. But then what happened was, I did it at school when I was 16, and then I did it at the Edinburgh Festival, I think when I was 18, which was a different production. And at the Edinburgh Festival, there was this venue there that, when you go to Edinburgh, you rent a venue, and this venue had just started that year, and it was called the Underbelly, and it was lots of tiny little rooms underneath a bridge in Edinburgh. And the guys who'd set up this venue called the Underbelly, it became their great business, and they were producers and run comedy festivals and theatre festivals. And so about 6-7 years ago, one of the producers came up to me and said, "Ed, would you ever consider doing this again?" And I'd always dreamt of it because I think there's something placeless about that character that's so intriguing. But I sort of thought on it, and then I thought of all the brilliant productions that I'd seen, and then I thought of Jessie Buckley. And Jessie, I just watched her work and her really unique career path that had started with a talent show aged 18 on British television. And then rather than go straight off and become a West End star, which she could have done, she went back and trained. And then I'd watched all her theatre as she started and then seen her great film work. And she has this extraordinary voice, but complete sort of gut and visceral, sort of instinctive I called up Jessie out of the blue and asked her if she would consider doing it, and she said yes. And so the two of us together found our brilliant director, Rebecca Fracknell. And this is a long way of saying, when I came back to it, it was amazing. But I had this odd thing of sort of having, I described it as, I had real imposter syndrome for a bit, because there was a bit of a backlash about, or I've heard quite clearly a backlash about my playing the character. And I felt like the stakes were very high. It's like, oh, you've produced this thing, and so who do you think you are, kind of thing. And I felt that because the answer is, who was I? Like, I'd done this, I'd enjoyed it when I was 17, but suddenly I was doing it in the West End, and they were transforming theatres, and they were spending we really wanted to do it differently. And so there was definitely a massive confidence crisis. But the way in this time for me was by this extraordinary woman called Julia Cheng, who's an amazing choreographer and dancer. And she and I started, similar to what I was saying before, the process, she and I started working 6 months before rehearsals. And we would just go and work together with Rebecca Fracknell, our director, and she would, rather than choreographing me, we just would work on movement, and she would see how I moved. And we did these workshops with all these multidisciplined dancers and really investigated it, so that by the time we started rehearsing, I felt, if not confident, I felt like able to be in a room with these exceptional movers. And
that is absolutely, I can't think of a more, I don't know, intimidating just role. That character to me has always been like, I don't know, there's something, like you said, timeless and enigmatic about it in a different way than anything else.
Well, I had a thing on it, like I had an idea about him which was to do with shape-shifting, and that he had access to this world and to these people, and he was at one with them, but also on top of them, and probably abusive, and then also manipulating them. But he could shapeshift his way out of the situation, so that by the end, when the world is, when it's get incredibly dark, he has the privilege to be able to put on a suit and walk, and shapeshift his way out of the situation, whereas the people in his club don't have that possibility. And so I had a sort of an idea, I suppose, which felt slightly different to the versions that I'd seen.
If I'm looking at the schedule correctly, was Cabaret your next project after wrapping The Good Nurse?
It was.
I can't think of two diametrically different men characters approaches. So I'm curious, navigating not only the switch between, because you do have a little bit of time in between there, but just navigating not only the switch between characters, but the switch from between theater and film, and how you're putting all that together in that in between time.
Well, the first thing was I was totally regalvanized by The Good Nurse. Jessica Chastain is an extraordinary actor and a formidable person and a real optimist. Like she is fucking brilliant, and she is confident and strong, and any sort of moments of doubt I had, she was so galvanizing. And I kind of got bored of doubt, basically, through it slightly. And Tobias Lindholm had reinvigorated my love of film, really, through pushing me, allowing space in takes to not feel sort of rushed, or really, really looking after us and allowing us that freedom, that the thing that I dream of as an actor, which is when a director goes, great, we've got it, now do one, just go play. So after that, I knew I was about to start these workshops for Cabaret, and I'd fallen back in love with what we do. And I'd always dreamt of going to this school in Paris called Le Coq, which is a physical theatre school. Some friends of mine when I was at university had gone there, and I looked up on their website, and they have these like 1-2 week courses and for practitioners. There was one on the theatre of the absurd. I basically wanted to keep pushing myself in outside of my comfort zone. I wanted to be able to humiliate myself. I wanted to arrive in the rehearsal room at Cabaret without feeling like I could try and fail at anything without being. I'd be able to make a fool of myself without it mattering, honestly. And I was like, why not go to Paris and do physical theatre, which I've never done, and so I got into this place, and it was an amazing week or two with actors aged sort of 18 to 60 from all over the world, which was wonderful. Like seeing, we forget that we're so used to the way it works in our countries that actually it's so inspiring to. I was just in Germany and then in Switzerland, and seeing how theatre is so important there. Each town has a kind of the theatre is almost the hub of the place, or dance similarly. And anyway, at this place, which is this sort of 19th century boxing ring, huge gymnasium, and with these French teachers, these two doyennes, sort of teachers who were extraordinary, but also would tell you no. Quite often when you've been acting for a while and it's gone well, people stop gripping you slightly. They go, just do your thing, And whereas these ladies very quickly, we were having to sort of improvise with people you've never met before in French, and I speak very bad French, and it was. And you do an improv, and they go, no, ça marche pas, no. But they did it to everyone. So you were learning from watching other people, and then they would galvanize you in the best way, and it really did help that experience. I would then, because I had left my wife and children at home, I was feeling like I've really got to make use of this time in Paris, and in the evening or the afternoons I'd be, researching film from the Weimar Republic, and Rebecca Frecknell and I were texting back images, and Tom Scott, the designer. So it was a time of real immersion that again made me arrive in the rehearsal space feeling full.
Is that something that happens not often, but has happened to you a few times, where you just need a reminder, or even like a boost in a new direction, where you've sort of been doing something similar for a while? Is that something that's happened to you often in your career, or was this like a major moment for you?
It was quite a major moment, honestly, because I think what it was about also making work that's not to be seen. Does that make sense? Like when you're being taught, or you're doing improv, and I know lots of actors go to acting coaches or to class, and it's not such a thing in the UK, class. But it's why, for example, quite often in London, I'll do workshops of plays, and I love, because it's again a way of working that is the process, and I'll be honest with you, that's the bit I enjoy. Like a rehearsal room is my happiest place. Like I would, and so getting to do some of that is without the work having to be finished or complete.
I do want to ask you a few specifics about The Good Nurse. Just starting with, is this a role that you auditioned for? Is this a role that you came to?
It's not. Yeah, no, it's a part that I was sent a script by my then agent Alain Ruspoli, and he was really passionate about Tobias, and he was and I read this script and I saw Tobias's work, and I was blown away by Tobias's work. He was a filmmaker with a take on the world, and I was desperate to be I was desperate to work with someone who had a real vision. And the film, Christy Wilson Cairns' script, as I read it, it refused to be boxed. It on the one hand, the kind of above the title thing is true crime. But it actually was something more sort of confusing than that. It was really a story about Jessica's character, this extraordinary woman who was able to stop this man from doing horrific things where the system failed. It was an expose of a system, but it was at its core, it was also a character piece about two friends, really. And the fact that it refused to be boxed, and the idea of that material in Tobias's hands was instantly intriguing. Tobias flew over. I think he had asked Jess to do it, and he was sort of thinking about various people, and he and I got on very well. It very quickly came together, and then it completely disintegrated as it moved from studio. And this was 6 years ago. So it moved from studios, and then Tobias was busy, and then Jess was busy, and our schedules, it was there was a moment when we were like, will this film ever get made? And we all three of us, or four of us, with Christy, our writer as well, feel so thrilled it did, because it was just, despite the subject matter, a really like scintillating experience for all of us.
I have to imagine, this is a difficult character, because for, I don't know, 95% of it, you absolutely can't show a side of him. You can't give anything away, which I'm curious how you navigate that, physically in your prep process. How were you approaching this character where his entire life is hiding who he is, basically?
Well, I was worried about that until I read the book. And there is this book called The Good Nurse by Charles Graeber that the last sort of quarter, third is our movie story, but the rest of it is this meticulously detailed description and biography of Charlie's upbringing, and it was an actor's dream, because there he was, like, there was the character, and in all the intricacies, from psychological reports to descriptions of physicality to actual transcripts of some of these scenes, and also there was amazing footage. But then when I was speaking to the real Amy Lochran, the character that Jess plays, and we spoke probably a month before we started filming, she described how this man was kind, incredibly loyal, funny, self-deprecating, and how he saved her life. And then she described that there was another human being who she met just twice. And she described it as a dissociative personality. She said it was that something happened to his eyes. One eye drifted off, and it was empty, like a vessel, and they're arrogant and sort of truculent. But that idea of him being dissociative, it being two people, was the in for me, because before I'd been trying to marry up these moments, there has to be a chord between. And when she said that the appearance was two different people, even though I knew I was going to be creating one person, it freed me up to invest truly in the friendship, and never, for me, not to sort of give signs. And quite a few of the scenes, even if they're the tense ones, the tension actually doesn't, or if he appears creepy, that's purely circumstance that creates that. That's purely Tobias's framing of it, rather than, I never went into a scene playing the intention of creepy.
The audience is sort of waiting. The audience is like looking for it, and it never comes. That's what's creepy about it. Is you don't get it.
Yeah, and the particularly, like, for example, that scene. There's a scene when Amy's knows now that Charlie's done this thing, and she comes home from work, and Charlie's at her home with her children, and her intention is to get him out of the house, and in the playing of it, again, it's filled with tension, but actually Charlie's just playing sort of affection for her. And this moment when she plays into his narcissism, as it were. And what's interesting is you get a glimpse of, she's like, you've done so much for me, you've saved my life. And rather than him being like, no, he's like, yeah. Like he suddenly this, and that for me was an electric sort of, but he's really trying to care for her, and actually that's all he is doing in that scene, is trying to comfort, but it appears as something much more sinister.
I do want to ask about two specific scenes. One of them being the scene in the diner with just you and Jessica, where it's sort of is the closest in front of her, where it's the closest where he comes to something switching over, but then it's immediately pulled back in. So I'm curious about that reining it back in and what that means to you in terms of, what you were hoping to get across.
Well, that scene was what they were. We'd done a lot of work on the arc of the piece, but Jess and I and Tobias had decided never to touch from that scene on, because it was a lot of Christie's words from there had been taken from transcript, and also but how she had managed to condense it and add to it was so beautifully crafted that we wanted to see what arrived on that day. Tobias allowed me to drive into that scene, even though you never saw the car for most of it. Every take, I'd be allowed the long drive in, which would, even if we were in close up and stuff, the intention in that scene was he believed, or Amy believed, that was the only time he ever felt it was something romantic. When she sort of went out for him, there was he's slightly sort of dressed up, and obviously he's off to his new job. But it's all playful for him until the moment that she says to him, "I wouldn't care if you'd done it." And it's the knowledge that she's lying that breaks him and turns him. And this thing that's described in the book and described by Amy of one eye kind of drifting off happens. But actually what that was about was just reclaiming the time and the space. And a lot of the rest of the film is about someone, this broken child being found out and exposed and trying to retain power. And so as soon as I'd had that moment with Jess, it was about just taking my own time, pulling the scene into my own rhythm, and leaving when I wanted to leave, and trying to show her that she's had no effect.
There absolutely is something very, I actually hadn't noticed it until you said that, something very childish about the, hand on the table and then just complete withdrawal. There's something very childlike about that.
It was interesting because at age 7, he was abused by one of his siblings' partners, and he tried to kill that person with I think it was with lighter fluid. And when that failed, he tried to kill himself with a chemistry set. But the idea of abused child, I wanted, and that you got tiny glimpses as an audience of seeing this frail little boy was important to me.
Amazing. So as I think I have 1 minute left here, so I did want to ask you one question about Fantastic Beasts, not in terms of what the future is or anything like that. I'm just curious, as an actor, what the experience is like having a character like that kind of exists apart from you. You leave him for a while, you come back to him. He's out there. It's just I'm curious what that's like as an actor. Even now where it's like we don't even know when you'll meet him again. Yeah. So I'm just curious what that's like for you as an actor.
Honestly, complicated. It's I signed on to these films from having read the first script, and there were always, when you were on set on the first film, there'd always be stories about what the future story was going to be, but then we were often kept in the dark about. You don't really on films of that scale, you don't have much input into the trajectory. It's that's all in Joe's mind, and so. You wait to see what you're given, honestly. But you do feel like you sort of... I adore him so much, and I love being in his skin. But you have no idea where it's going to go. But it does feel strange, just sort of treading water quality when you have no idea if there's a resolution or I know that he ends up married in Dorset to Tina, played by Catherine Waterston, and Dorset's a very beautiful part of the world, so he ends up happy.
Nice. Well, Eddie, again, thank you so much for being here. This was fascinating. I really, really appreciate it, and
I so enjoyed it. Amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
See you.
Thanks, as always, to our brilliant producer, Jamie Muffett, and to the whole team at Backstage, Samantha Sherlock, Mark Stinson, Caitlin Watkins, and of course, Casey Howe. Visit Backstage.com, and don't forget, you can subscribe to Backstage with code ENVELOPE at checkout for a free trial. 100% free, you simply cannot beat that. For more exclusive content, find us on Facebook and Twitter at In the Envelope, and subscribe, share, and leave a comment. Who should we interview next? Let us know. Thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next time for another peek in the envelope.